The Israeli-Palestinian conflict, spanning decades, claiming thousands of lives, defining tensions across the Middle East and beyond. How did this intricate conflict origin and evolve to shape geopolitics today? What key events and forces fueled the divisions we see now? Can understanding the complex history point to paths forward for peace? The Israeli-Palestinian dispute provokes strong emotions on both sides. The controversial history makes objective analysis difficult, but gaining insight into the clashing narratives and origins of enmity seems essential for ending the long cycle of violence. In this video, we will examine key events surrounding Israel's founding, including the British Mandate, the 1947 UN Partition Plan, and the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. We'll consider how each side has contributed to current tensions, and we'll explore the profound impact on the region. Understanding history alone cannot resolve entrenched conflicts. However, it can uncover opportunities for peace and unity that many might not have considered before. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has its roots in the late 19th and early 20th century, when Jews fleeing persecution in Europe sought to establish a homeland in Ottoman-controlled Palestine. This immigration was boosted by the 1917 Balfour Declaration, in which Britain endorsed the idea of a Jewish homeland. Let's examine the key events that led to the creation of Israel and the resulting conflict with the Palestinian people. The rise of Zionism. In the late 1800s, the Zionist movement emerged, which called for establishing a Jewish nation-state in Palestine, their historic homeland. Persecution of Jews in Europe led to increased Jewish immigration to Palestine in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. This immigration worried the Arab population, who saw it as a threat to their cultural identity in the region. Tensions grew as land purchases and Jewish settlements led to the eviction of some Palestinian tenant farmers. The roots of the conflict emerged as two national movements, Zionism and Palestinian nationalism, competed for control over the same land. Policies by the Ottoman authorities to limit Jewish immigration and land purchases added to the tensions. The Arab population protested against the growth of Zionist settlements. By the early 1900s, violent clashes were already occurring between the Jewish immigrants and the Arab residents. The British Mandate. After World War I and the fall of the Ottoman Empire, Britain took control of Palestine. In 1917, the Balfour Declaration endorsed a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine while claiming to protect the rights of non-Jewish communities. In the 1920s and 30s, Jewish immigration continued to increase, fueling Palestinian opposition. The Arab population resented the influx of European Jews who seemed to be displacing them from the land. Violent clashes occurred in the form of Palestinian riots against Jewish communities in 1921, 1929, and from 1936 to 1939. The Palestinians felt the Jews were encroaching on their rights and national aspirations. Britain attempted to resolve the violence through various commissions and policy proposals for partitioning the land, but no lasting compromise emerged that satisfied both Arabs and Jews. By the end of World War II, the stage was set for all-out conflict between Jewish and Arab forces over control of Palestine. UN Partition Plan. After World War II ended, Britain turned the Palestine issue over to the newly created United Nations. In 1947, UN proposed splitting the territory into separate Jewish and Palestinian states. The Jews accepted the plan, but the Palestinians and neighboring Arab states rejected it, unwilling to accept the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine. The Arabs opposed the UN for both political and practical reasons. Politically, they rejected the notion of Jewish sovereignty in Palestine. Practically, they argued that the proposed borders would trap many Arabs inside the Jewish state against their will. War broke out between Jewish and Arab forces immediately after the UN plan was announced. Once the British Mandate ended on May 14, 1948, Israel declared its independence, sparking the First Arab-Israeli War. The 1948 Arab-Israeli War. In 1948, troops from surrounding Arab nations invaded the former Palestine territory following Israel's declaration of independence. The Arabs rejected the existence of a Jewish state. A mass exodus of Palestinians occurred during the war, creating a refugee crisis with long-term implications. Around 700,000 Palestinians fled or were expelled from their homes. The causes of the Palestinian exodus remain controversial. Palestinians saw themselves as forced out by Israeli military actions. Israel argues many Palestinians left voluntarily or were encouraged to leave by Arab leaders. The war ended in 1949 with Israel holding more land than the 1947 UN Partition Plan allotted. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced, marking the beginnings of their decades-long struggle to form an independent state. Reflections after 1949. The 1948 war left lasting scars. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were prevented from returning home and became refugees in neighboring countries. Repeated attempts over the decades to resolve their plight have failed. For Israel, its survival against invading Arab armies brought relief, but also recognition that its security could not be taken for granted. This mindset would heavily influence Israeli policy and actions in decades to come. Let's examine the major events after 1949 surrounding occupation, peace efforts, and continued cycles of violence that perpetuated the conflict into the 21st century. Israel's borders and the 1967 war. In 1967, Palestinian militants launched attacks from the Egyptian-controlled Gaza Strip while Arab leaders threatened Israel. In response, Israel launched the Six-Day War, capturing the West Bank, Gaza, Sinai, and the Golan Heights. This gave Israel control of the entire British Mandate territory meant for the Jewish state under the original 1947 UN plan. But it also brought over 1 million Palestinians in these occupied territories under Israeli control. The Palestinian territories have remained under Israeli occupation since then, while expanded Israeli settlements in them have created a major point of contention in peace negotiations. The rise of the PLO. After the 1967 war, Palestinian nationalism coalesced around the Palestine Liberation Organization, or PLO, founded in 1964. The PLO initially vowed to liberate all of historic Palestine through armed struggle, rejecting Israel's existence. During the 1960s and 72nd, Palestinian militant groups launched attacks against Israel from bases in Jordan, Lebanon, and Egypt, while Israel responded with force against Arab states that sponsored them. Seeking peace through Oslo. In 1974, the Arab League proposed a peace initiative, recognition of Israel in exchange for Israel's withdrawal from occupied Arab territories. But the PLO rejected the plan at the time. It wasn't until the 1990s that serious recognition of Israel's legitimacy emerged among Palestinian leadership. Secret talks led to the 1993 Oslo Accord between Israel and the PLO. Oslo provided gradual Palestinian autonomy in the West Bank and Gaza and set a framework for subsequent peace talks. But the final status issues remained unresolved. The Second Intifada. In 2000, the optimism of Oslo faded as the Second Intifada, or uprising, erupted, the bloodiest period of the conflict since 1967. Violence included Palestinian suicide bombings against Israelis and heavy Israeli military actions in the West Bank and Gaza. This period hardened attitudes and deepened distrust between both sides. Analyzing the perspectives. At its core, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a clash between two national movements claiming the same land as their rightful home. How did we arrive at the profound divisions defining relations today? From Israel's founding, its priority has been ensuring security and survival. Surrounded by hostile Arab neighbors, Israel relied on military strength to protect its sovereignty. This produced policies and actions that contributed to Palestinian resentment and violence, fueling the conflict. For instance, Israel's military occupation of the West Bank and blockade of Gaza after 1967, while arguably improving Israel's security, also imposed hardships for Palestinians under occupation. Settlement building in the West Bank likewise improved Israel's strategic position while angering Palestinians. Have Israel's security measures gone too far at times? Could some compromise have eased tensions while still protecting Israel? These questions haunt Israeli society today. For Palestinians, the core grievance is their dispossession and loss of homeland in 1948. The Palestinian refugee crisis created a nation in exile, yearning for its own flag and self-determination. This produced intense claims on the disputed land, but was compromise possible by recognizing Israel's legitimacy early on? Could violence have been avoided by accepting partition? Such questions divide Palestinian politics still today between pragmatists and ideologues. The conflict's long intractability suggests mistakes on both sides. Israelis at times dismissed Palestinian national identity and aspirations. Palestinians at times rejected Israel's overtures for peace and statehood. When we see our adversaries suffering, it appears self-inflicted due to bad choices. When we see our own group suffering, it appears unjustly imposed by others. This selective blindness afflicts Israelis and Palestinians alike. Can the future be different? Though distrust runs deep, people on both sides increasingly see the status quo as harmful. Moderates recognize extremism just perpetuates conflict without improving lives. Most Israelis and Palestinians yearn less for victory than for freedom from violence and occupation, for better opportunities for their children. Perhaps when people on both sides share the same basic hopes and dreams, old divides can finally crumble. Recent events. In the last decade, divisions emerged within Palestinian politics between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza. Hamas refuses to recognize Israel. Peace efforts have stalled, while Israel maintains its blockade on Gaza. Critics say the current right-wing Israeli government has expanded controversial settlements in the occupied West Bank, further undermining the peace process. Today, the conflict continues in altered form, but many core grievances remain unresolved for the Palestinians, notably the refugee problem, the status of Jerusalem, and the ongoing occupation. What path forward is viable given the profound distrust and violence plaguing relations between Israelis and Palestinians for over 70 years? The impact on the region. The events surrounding Israel's creation and the resulting conflict with the Palestinians have had profound impacts on the Middle East region that persist today. When hundreds of thousands of Palestinians were displaced in 1948, they could not return home and became refugees in neighboring Arab states like Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, and Egypt. The refugee issue created economic and political burdens for those countries, along with simmering tensions between the refugees and host governments. For the Palestinians themselves, the events of 1948 meant tragically losing their homes and homeland. They have sought to regain some of what was lost ever since through their push for statehood. But broad regional opposition to Israel's existence made progress elusive. The threat Israel posed to Arabs also encouraged Arab unity against their new neighbor in the early years. The Arab League was formed in 1945, even before Israel's creation, as Arab nations sought greater collaboration against Jewish statehood. But Israel's surprising victory over Arab armies in 1948 and again in 1967 also dealt blows to Arab prestige. The failure to defeat Israel demoralized Arabs and created doubts about their political leadership. Over time, the conflict's burdens drained Arab nations' resources and limited their development. For instance, Syria lost the Golan Heights to Israel in 1967 and has strained to modernize its military to retake the lost territory. However, Israel has also faced isolation as the only Jewish nation surrounded by Arab countries opposed to its existence. It has had to invest heavily in defense rather than social services to protect itself. The Palestinian struggle, with its powerful personal stories of loss and exile, has galvanized anti-Israel sentiment across the Arab and Muslim world for generations. Perhaps most tragically, the unresolved conflict has brought over 70 years of violence, prolonging suffering on both sides. Extremism and zero-sum attitudes have fed off each other, obstructing compromise. But changing attitudes among Arab publics open new possibilities. But growing pragmatism and fatigue with violence could allow fresh policies to heal the divisions. The quest for two sovereign nations living side by side in peace remains elusive. Events in the 20th century, wars, occupations, terrorism, and militancy have bred enduring enmity. Extremism on both sides undercuts moderate voices hoping for compromise through partition and territorial concessions. Yet glimmers of hope emerge during intermittent ceasefires and peace talks. The history reveals how Israel's security concerns and ambitions, Palestinian demands for self-determination, and the claims of refugees all intertwine in a complex knot. Unraveling it requires diligence, courage, and visionary leadership. But many believe Israelis and Palestinians share a common humanity and desire for security that could bear fruit if reconciliation found fertile ground. Perhaps the bloody history of the conflict ultimately will be prologue to that end. As attitudes shift, could innovative leaders finally unwind this knotty conflict? Share your thoughts and insights with us. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications to see new videos when they are released. Until next time, thanks for watching.